Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Timothy Lee, and I'm a research analyst with RedCloud Securities, and I'm delighted to host a RedCloud webinar on nickel exploration today. We will hear from Greg Beischer, President and CEO of Alaska Energy Metals, which is AEMC on the TSX Venture Exchange. During today's webinar, he will provide an overview and outlook. Then we will take questions. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time, and we will get to as many as we can. Before we kick things off, first we need to discuss some fine print. During this Alaska Energy Metals webinar, forward-looking statements may be made. I would direct listeners to the company's forward-looking statements disclosure outlined on page 2 of the company's corporate presentation that can be found on the company's website, alaskaenergymetals.com. For RedCloud Securities, Inc., I would highlight that this webinar is for information purposes only. It should not be considered a solicitation or a recommendation to buy or sell securities. We note that this call does not consider the particular situation or needs of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigation and seek their own professional advice before investing. Please see our most recent research located on the RedCloud website for specific disclosures pertaining to Alaska Energy Metals. So we have Alaska Energy Metals presenting today. The company is focused on nickel exploration in Alaska, where it is drilling up a large bulk tonnage deposit and also has an earlier stage high-grade exploration target. With that, I now turn over to Greg to update our audience on the company.
Great. Thanks very much, Tim. Glad to be here. Welcome, everybody. And let's start off just with this photo. It's a photo of our drill from this past summer's program. But it's interesting for me because this photograph actually brings me full circle. My first career as a geologist was with Inco, at the time the largest nickel mining company in the world, now part of Vale. And I went to school in Sudbury and Haileybury in Ontario and worked for Inco for quite a number of years all over. But in 1995, they moved me to Alaska to explore this exact spot. And the reason was that geologically, from a distance, the geology looks a lot like the Norilsk area of Russia, which is the site of the largest rich nickel deposits on Earth. And so as a young geologist, they sent me to Alaska to find other deposits like at the Norilsk area. And while we didn't find big, rich, massive sulfide deposits, we did discover drilled into hundreds of meters of disseminated nickel mineralization, well, really nickel plus other metals as well. And at the time, it was very interesting and geologic interest, but economically, it wouldn't have made it in the 1990s. The project moved on to other hands, and they found more and more of this disseminated nickel, but eventually the price of nickel dropped. The companies that were exploring went away. And a couple of years ago, we were able to pick up all the mineral rights to this original project that I worked on starting 27 years ago. And so we formed Alaska Energy Metals, and we raised money, and we're off to the races, drilling off this disseminated mineralization that very well today may be economic, or certainly in the coming market for energy type metals. Well, Tim mentioned the forward-looking statements, and I don't like to just blow by this slide. We as exploration geologists, try our best, especially at Alaska Energy Metals. We've been working together as a team for a while, and we do our very best to execute what we say we're going to do. But it doesn't always work out, and so just mention that. But we do our very best with our shareholders' money. So why nickel, and why is nickel going to become in much more demand. Its primary use has always been the manufacture of stainless steel, a little bit of nickel and chrome, and that steel won't rust. But there's quite a variety of uses for nickel in all manner of manufactured products. But now there's a whole new use, and that's in the batteries of electric vehicles, lithium-ion rechargeable batteries. And you can see, though, from this graphic, as Elon Musk once quipped, that we really should call them graphite nickel batteries rather than lithium-ion batteries, because there's quite a bit more nickel by weight in them than lithium. So 29 kilos or 64 pounds per vehicle battery, really. And so as the adoption rate of these vehicles increases, so will the demand for nickel. The graph on the left is from the United States Department of Energy. The y-axis shows how important the various metals are to the energy expansion or electrical energy expansion, but also the risk of supply to the United States. And you'll see up in the right corner, they rate lithium and nickel as the ones that will be most critical in the coming 10 or 15 years. And well, as a geologist, I've seen that our industry is actually finding a lot of lithium now that we've really been looking hard for it for the last decade or so. But I also know as a nickel geologist that nickel's really hard to find. It's not very well distributed over the surface of the earth, occurs only with specific types of rocks, and it's very, very difficult to find high-grade nickel deposits. Our industry over the century has discovered most of the easy-to-find, rich, massive sulfide deposits. And so I believe to meet the demand, our industry will start mining lower and lower grade or lower concentration nickel deposits to meet that demand. But I would say that Indonesia, as one of the largest producers of nickel, can definitely ramp up and is ramping up their production. And that's okay, except that there's a really quite a big carbon footprint to the production of that particular type of nickel called laterite nickel. And so if the whole idea is to put less carbon in the air by driving electric vehicles, mining and processing and refining laterite nickel, which is very energy intensive, and to a large degree they use coal to create that energy, then that's not doing the job. It's really counterproductive to the whole idea of an electrical energy transition or expansion. So it's going to be really important for the United States to develop its own domestic sources that are secure, where the production and delivery to the United States market can be guaranteed. Most of the nickel coming into to the United States actually comes from Canada. 50% comes from Canada. But one thing about that is I know Canada's building its own battery plants, and I wonder if some of the Canadian nickel coming to the U.S. market is going to keep coming. But at the Nikolai project in Alaska, in the United States, we have what potentially is a very large deposit. I can't say that definitively today. We haven't delineated, but I can say it is a potential mineral deposit. Every black dot on the map is a place where there was a core hole drilled previously. Some of which I drilled myself as a much younger geologist in the early or mid 1990s. And interestingly, just about every one of these holes hit around 0.34%, at least on average. Some of the holes are less than that, some are a little more, but on average, 0.34% nickel equivalent, around 0.25% nickel, plus the value of the copper, cobalt, platinum, palladium, and gold. So quite consistent, quite homogeneous across this band of rock I've shaded in yellow. And we did raise money this year, and we've drilled the holes shown in blue so far. And that's allowing us to calculate a volume of mineralized rock. And from that, we'll be able to calculate the tonnage and grade. And if that historical grade of 0.34 or 0.35% nickel equivalent holds up, then we can see that we would have somewhere within that red area, or delineated by that red shaded area, we'd have somewhere in the order of 5 to 7 billion pounds of nickel within an actual inferred resource. We can't say today that we've got an inferred resource, but we should be able to soon, based on those drilling results and other metals to go with it. There'd be at least a couple of billion pounds of copper, 500 million pounds of cobalt or more, with platinum, palladium, and even a bit of gold to go with it. So we would propose to drill those holes in yellow next year in a fairly aggressive program. But after that, we would have somewhere in this order of a mineral deposit or in a resource, and that would put us up in the same sort of size category as companies like Canada Nickel or FPX, who measure their market capitalization in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And ours is just around 25 million or 30 million right now. So I think potentially we should be able to move the value of our company up pretty rapidly in the coming 18 months. So good team that's been together for a while. We know what we're doing in Alaska. Most of us live in Alaska, at least on the technical side. We are a venture exchange listed company and have people in Vancouver, but for all intents and purposes, we are an Alaska company. And I live in Anchorage, as do most of the rest of the geologists on the team. And we've got a track record together of being able to execute very efficient exploration programs. But we've also teamed with a group out of Vancouver that's helped us raise a lot of money on the capital markets side. They know what they're doing and have introduced us to the right people. But our board and our advisory board is strong too. We've got some serious technical horsepower in magmatic deposits, the type of deposits that host nickel. So I think we've got a great team here to execute. Well, here's the basics on the company. Right now, there's only 51 million shares outstanding. And the market cap of the company is just under 30 million Canadian. We were successful in raising quite a lot of money over the summer in a really tough market. We recapitalized the company in April with $2.7 million at a 28-cent financing, and then in the middle of the summer with two parallel 40-cent financings. And now the stock's trading at 55 to 60 cents. So all our investors are new, having most of them come in at 40 cents, and some existing investors sticking with us and very supportive. So the stock's performing well, and we're hopeful it'll continue to do so as we roll out more news. So I live here in Anchorage. The project's pretty accessible. It's probably a 6-hour drive from my house on paved highways. Or you could fly to Fairbanks, and it's just a couple of hours down the Richardson Highway. Alaska is quite supportive of mineral developments. We're a wealthy state that's done well because of oil resources, and potentially, I think Alaska can be a real reservoir of metallic mineral wealth for the rest of the United States. It really hasn't been very well explored. I think there's untold riches yet to be found in our state, and I think the Nikolai project is an example of that. We're not far off the beaten path here. There's power not too far away, grid power connected to the rest of the Alaska powered grid, and railways not too far away to the west that runs between Fairbanks and Anchorage. And then, of course, there's deep water ports on the ocean. So I think even though we're pretty far north, we're in a really good spot for development logistics. So zooming in, here is the Richardson Highway leading south from Fairbanks. Our claims are shown in red. There's 2 blocks to the project. Canwell here on the edge of the Alaska Range Mountains, which you can see there in white, snow-covered mountains and glaciers running through the valleys. The Eureka block is out on the flatter land in the south side of the range of mountains. And so this is a paved highway here. This is a gravel trail or road leading to some historical and actually still active placer gold mines. This trail potentially could be upgraded. It would also require a crossing across the Delta River here. For now, we're using helicopters to support our drill programs, but ultimately we would look to refurbishing and extending that gravel road. This is the Denali Highway here. It's quite a wide, we call it a highway. It's a gravel road, not plowed in the winter, but is quite a substantial road. This is always a good time to talk about permitting and development logistics, and I think we're in a quite a good spot here. We are on state of Alaska owned land, which is positive. The state is supportive of mineral development and has a sort of a one-stop shop permitting process for mining operations that coordinate amongst the other state organizations. Ultimately, though, the federal government is involved in mine permitting. The Environmental Protection Agency and the Corps of Engineers are involved, and one of them ends up being the lead in the federal NEPA permitting process. But I think it's a very permittable spot. We always have the hot button topic of salmon in Alaska, but there is no salmon on the project, or for that matter, downstream for probably at least 50 miles or 80 kilometers. And the reason being that the streams that run from our project originate in these glaciers that you can see in the mountains. And so all the water is very rapid flowing, heavily sediment laden water that really isn't conducive to, well, any type of fish habitat, never mind salmon. So that takes a big part out of permitting. But there are sensitivities. No project, I don't think, in Alaska is going to go unchallenged, or just about anywhere for that matter. But I think it's very permittable. One sensitivity is that this area here is very popular for canoers and rafters who then use these lakes here, but then paddle down the upper part of the Delta River, which is actually quite clear and beautiful. I mean, we're well removed from that, 10 or 15 kilometers away from that river, but nevertheless, I'm sure there will be people that won't want to see development will end up being opposed. But I think ultimately it is permittable place. Right here, you can see that the river gets muddy all of a sudden, and then it gets into this great big muddy delta river that doesn't support fish. So that's where we sit on permitting. So I'm showing you now a cross-section right across this Eureka zone that's in yellow. And you can see the scale. I mean, this zone of mineralization known from historical drilling is more than 10 kilometers in strike length from that sparse historical drilling. So here's a cross-section vertical slice through the earth. Here's the surface of the earth here. You can see that the zone, which is shaded in red and pink, comes right to surface. And a couple of historical holes shown here, and then 2 holes which we drilled this summer through the zone. And these were quite good intersections. This hole here, 341 meters down hole, 0.34% nickel equivalent. That means on this particular area, the zone has a true thickness measured perpendicularly across it of about 315 meters. So very substantial thickness to the mineralized zone. I've colored the central part darker because the grade or concentration of metals is better in the central part, averaging somewhere around 0.45% nickel. But taken across the entire zone, it averages out to around 0.34 or 0.35% nickel equivalent. This is what it looks like. It's just a dark black, what geologists call a peridotite, with sprinkles of iron, nickel, and copper sulfides disseminated throughout that rock. So those little sparkly bits are what we'd be capturing in a milling process. And this is probably a section from the higher grade core zone, where we've got about just over 0.25% nickel plus the other metals to go along with it, adding up to just around 0.47% nickel equivalent. So on something like this, recovery of those metals is going to be extremely important, and we've just started that work. But we know enough from historical work that at least in the core zone, the red bar indicates that over 90% of the nickel is in the form of pentlandite. That's a very common nickel sulfide mineral that's readily captured by standard milling methods, flotation. And not much of the nickel is tied up in olivine or other silicate minerals, which locks that nickel up. So at least in the core zone, most of the nickel is in potentially recoverable nickel sulfide form. In the outer envelope, less so in pentlandite, but we've got the addition of this nickel iron alloy, just a simple combination of nickel and iron that's quite magnetic and therefore also readily recoverable. But in this case, in the outer zone, it seems like more of the nickel's tied up in the silicate minerals and not going to be recoverable. But overall, I think the initial signs are that the nickel should have a pretty high recovery level, but we don't know that yet, and we've got lots of work underway at this point to determine recovery rates. So our strategy here has been pretty simple. Raise the money to drill the holes in blue. We did that. We executed the program drilling 8 holes, and that's going to allow us to block out this rock shaded in red, and it should give us somewhere around 300 million tons of rock. And if that historical grade of roughly 0.35% holds up, then within that red area, we're going to have likely we would have a resource that's in the range of 1.3 to 1.7 billion pounds of nickel within that area shaded in red, with the other elements to go with it. And that's a pretty sizable nickel deposit just right there after 1 year of drilling. We've received 4 assay results from 4 of the holes. On all 4, the grade has come out to 0.34% nickel equivalent, so we're close. And 4 holes remaining to come, results in the next 4 weeks. After that, we crunch the numbers and then take this possible mineral deposit to an actual inferred resource. But we might be able to short circuit that a bit, or shortcut it. We recently purchased all of the historical exploration data for this project. And so now we have the assays and the core logs and the photographs and access to the core from all these historical holes shown as black dots. And you'll see there's 2 places where the holes are clustered closely enough together that we can immediately calculate a resource here on the red hatched area, and here 2 resources that will be roughly 3 kilometers apart. And based on our observations in these holes that we've drilled this summer, plus the other historical holes, it seems reasonable that we'll be able to join these 2 resources once they're announced, join them together with further drilling. And that would be the plan next year when we drill more holes, the ones shown in yellow. And so we would extend, definitely fill in between, and then beyond in both directions. So we end up with a mineralized zone, hopefully all converted from potential mineral deposit to inferred resource over a strike distance of nearly 5 kilometers. So that'll be a very substantial amount of metal in the ground. Somewhere between 5 and 7 billion pounds of nickel is what we project would be there. So lots of work to do before that. We'll have to raise the money to drill 15,000 meters of 26 holes, as shown in yellow. So we would look to raise that money before next summer. And of course, we've already started the metallurgical studies that we'll need to show what is recoverable out of that. So with a deposit of that size, this would be us here. We don't have this deposit yet. Let me be clear. We don't have this inferred resource. Right now, we're just saying potentially this is what we could have based on the historical drilling that we see. But we'd have a deposit that on the blue bar would be between 5 and 7 million pounds of nickel. And this green bar represents the amount of all metals combined. And this would start to get us up into the same ballpark as the Crawford deposit of Canada Nickel or the FPX Baptiste or Dakar deposit in British Columbia. And these guys' market cap is right now around 160 million, 93 million here. I think Canada Nickel, who I view that as a good comparison to our deposit, both geologically, mineralogically, and in size. And And their stock I think peaked with a market cap of over $400 million. So I'm thinking that we should be similarly valued to these companies after a fairly short period of time. For me, it was really good to see Anglo American take a 10% interest in Canada Nickel for $25 million. I think Anglo and Glencore and Jogmec and others have seen the future. They know that it's so difficult to discover brand new rich nickel deposits. And so as an industry, we're going to have to mine these larger bulk tonnage nickel deposits. And, when I think about the copper business, big mining companies like these love porphyry copper deposits that have multi-decade mine life with a fairly regular metal concentration within them. They can see that they can execute their mining operations over long periods and know that they can capture a couple of good metal price spikes in those decades of mining. Those price spikes are when they really make money. But I think these companies have seen that we as an industry have to mine lower grade deposits, and now they're looking and actually making partnerships with companies even at this early stage of development. They're investing. And the reality is there's just not many nickel development projects in the pipeline right now. So they're having to come to explorer developers like Stillwater, like Canada Nickel and FPX, and probably Alaska Energy Metals too. We look to have a strategic partnership one day, but for now, we know we can raise the capital ourselves. We're talking to, in fact, we're more inclined to a strategic partnership with perhaps a mineral processing company, one particularly maybe that has a different approach to separating nickel from the rock through hydrometallurgical processes or some other process that actually allows us to make nickel metal in Alaska rather than shipping a concentrate away to an existing smelter. That would be our preference. Or who knows, maybe a strategic partnership with a battery company or car company that wants to secure supply going forward to the future. I've seen battery plants being built on the eastern seaboard and in Quebec and in Ontario as well. And I wonder if these battery plants have any security of supply of the raw materials that they need to make their batteries. And so I think having a secure domestic United States supply of nickel in particular is going to be very important to them. And so we know we can build out value in our company in this bulk tonnage deposit. But I first came to this spot to find massive sulfide-rich deposits like those at Norilsk in Siberia. And there is signs of this. We have at surface some quite high grade, in fact, exceptionally high grade massive sulfide occurrences or showings at surface. And so we did a lot of work this past summer on this ground on the Canwell block. Here's the Richardson Highway. Here there are trails that go back to these various prospects. And now we've done a lot of geophysical work to delineate drill targets that we would propose to drill next summer, as well as on the Eureka zone. And just in a quick example of one of the places, here's a cross section through the earth. There's the surface of the earth there, showing or occurrence of nickel right at surface here, and a short little drill hole below it but the people that drilled this hole didn't have the benefit of this geophysical survey that we're showing that we did this summer. And it's pretty apparent to us that the geophysics is showing something quite strongly conductive right here. And it's also quite magnetic. Nickel is a magnetic metal that conducts quite well, and so we would propose to drill a couple of holes here to test this great geophysical target with nickel on surface right above it. So here's what's going to roll out. Very soon, we should be able to publish our first resource. In fact, 2 resources, as I showed on the map, from that historical information. We'll get the rest of our drill results over the coming 4 weeks and announce those as they come. And then by next March, use our summer's drilling results to do an update to the resource calculation. And we're going to have, I think, a pretty darn good-sized nickel deposit at that point. The metallurgical work should be done at around the same time, giving us a first indication on recoverability of the metals. And then we've raised money and we're off to a more aggressive drilling program next year. Following that, we start to move into the more engineering and economic feasibility studies that would roll out from there. First order of business is always, let's establish that there really is a nickel deposit in the ground with the other metals, and how many tons and what is the concentration of metals in the ground, and can we get it out. So we're just getting started. The company's been in existence for just 6 months. I think we're on a great trajectory here. We've got momentum. We're starting to get out to tell our story more and more. It's resonating well with potential investors, but we're putting some pretty serious money into telling the investing public about this project. I feel strongly that it's worth doing that in this case, that expenditure in marketing will provide a good return to us. And so we're really on the trail right now, and part of the reason I'm here talking to you all today. So I think I'll open the floor up for questions.
Great. Thank you, Greg, for the very informative presentation. We'll now start the Q&A portion of the webinar. Reminder to everyone on the line, you can type your questions into the chat box at any time. We do have a couple of questions here. One that's ever popular, and I think you did mention it in the presentation, but how much cash does the company have, and would you need to raise more money for ongoing work?
Yeah, we've got just over $1 million right now, which isn't too much. But one thing I hadn't mentioned is it looks like we're about to close on the purchase of a Quebec company that's got not just a great nickel project, but also it's got cash in its treasury. And so that'll bring in another $2.8 million right away as soon as that closes. And that's plenty to see us through until next March, when we've hit that real milestone of our first resource, or at least a major upgrade to the resource. So as long as that goes through here in the next week or so, then we're good. The Quebec project does offer us the opportunity, of course, to raise flow-through financing for the work there, and potentially we would do that almost right away. I also have history in Quebec. I love exploring there because the province is so supportive of its mining industry, and really with the availability of flow-through financing, which favors the issuer, and various rebates available for critical metal exploration. I mean, we can explore very, very inexpensively in Quebec, and so I quite look forward to doing that.
Great. Another question here. What about community relations? Do you have any Aboriginal groups or other local communities to negotiate with?
Absolutely. I mean, one thing most people don't know is that Aboriginal land claims or native land claims have long been resolved in Alaska. And the 12 Alaska Native corporations own a good part of the state of Alaska, over 13% of the landmass. And they own the minerals underneath that land and the timber on top and the oil and gas rights. And they're companies, though. And they have been successful. And so they understand the modern business world. In fact, they're business leaders. And so all resolved. There is no native-owned land immediately near the project. It's on state-owned land. State of Alaska owned land. So, of course, we're in the Otna Native Corporation region, and all of the Alaska Native corporations have subsidiary companies that can supply service to us, be it environmental services, civil engineering, road building. They can do this kind of work and they're good at it. So it only makes sense to, if they're competitive on pricing, to engage their services. And we certainly would plan to do that. But yeah, the area where we are is popular with recreationalists, as I mentioned, canoers and rafters in the Tanga Lakes and Upper Delta River area. In the winter, it's popular for snow machiners that get out and recreate. And well, you know, I mentioned the Canwell claim block as being fairly accessible because it has roads and trails all over it, despite the mountainous region there. And so it's popular. People use those trails for four-wheeling and or snow machining in the winter. You know, and even though they regularly use them now, and I know they'll be apprehensive of us coming to explore and or potentially develop there. But I mean, the reality is that we built the roads 30 years ago. It was our industry geologists that built those roads so that the land actually is accessible. So, but to answer the question, yes, community relations is extremely important. We based ourselves last year in the town of Delta Junction, north of the project area, by about a 45-minute drive, and supportive community there. But there will be people that are apprehensive of our work. So we are very tuned into community relations. I know our geologists are, you know, the first ambassadors in the field, and we really do our best to get off on the right foot with communities. But certainly keeping things in perspective is important. I mean, we have here right now, it's a prospect, a potential mineral deposit. If everything goes well, very soon we'll have an actual deposit or resource. On an engineering basis, we can say that we've got an inferred resource. And then maybe by next March, it's quite a large resource. And maybe several years from now, it's a big resource of nickel. But people in the community should understand that this is going to be years in the making. And they definitely shouldn't become too alarmed. And there's a long permitting process involved. But community relations and developing that social license and hopefully community support is very, very important to us.
Great. One question that came in here: did the data you purchased include Anglo's squid surveys? If so, anything interesting there?
Yeah, it does include that data. You know, we made a bargain on that purchase of that data. Unlike Canada, where exploration data becomes you know, property of all Canadians, it becomes public data. That's not true in the United States. This is sort of research and development that the company paid for, so it's an asset. And someone owned the data, and they'd kept it well curated. It was in good condition and a good database. So we purchased it at pennies on the dollar. Really, it represents $30 million worth of work. Well, at least at the time, from the time I first set foot on the property in the mid-90s, then the work that Anglo did in joint venture with Pure Nickel, and then Itochu in joint venture with Pure Nickel. A lot of great work was done that costs $30 million US. If you were to reproduce it all today, it would probably cost you 40 or 50 million, and we got it for $1 million cash and $1 million in shares. So I think we made a good bargain there, but it did include airborne geophysical surveys of various types that are extremely valuable now that we're going through them. It does have the squid survey, which is an excellent type of airborne survey, ground geophysical surveys, thousands and thousands of soil and rock samples, geologic mapping, all that basic work that's necessary on projects like this is more or less done. We'll keep doing some geophysics, but mostly it's a drilling project at this point, Dave, and that data that we purchase is extremely valuable to us.
Great. I guess one question, following up on the road, what would be required to permit to gain direct road access to the project?
Yeah, that remains to be seen. We're still looking in it. The road itself is an established road, and no one can really take that away. And we have the inalienable right to access our mining claims, even across the Delta River, which is classified as a wild and scenic river. That layers an extra level of permitting on it. It's not that we can be denied, but it's probably a higher bar to get over. And we're at this point just investigating that. There's no decisions yet on how we would go about that. There is alternate routes into the project areas potentially as well, but we're still learning what's actually going to be involved in permitting for greater access to the deposit site.
Great. Now we do have one question here. It's a little general, but maybe we'll expand on it. But is there interest from the U.S. government for critical mineral supply? And maybe building on that, are there any programs out there for maybe even grant money or different things for exploration at this stage?
Well, indeed, there is. We've seen a nickel project called Talon in Minnesota get a tremendous grant, just a straight grant of somewhere around 120 million US dollars. Graphite One, a great graphite project in far western Alaska, get 37 million US dollars to underwrite their feasibility study on that project. So we're certainly aware the current administration is really pushing hard for electrification, and they seem to understand that, well, that's going to take a lot of metal, and they're putting money into it through the Defense Production Act. So it's a Department of Defense that's overseeing these grants. We've certainly applied to them for a grant. We understand our application made it over the first hurdle, and we're waiting to see whether we actually get that grant. And it would be, really quite helpful. Reduces our cost of capital significantly. And there's still honestly a bit of a disconnect. I think in the United States administration, they're really pushing for electrification. But the permitting agencies are still a little tough. Mostly, there's nothing wrong with the United States mine permitting process. The NEPA process is excellent, really, but it's the time frames that are on the on permitting. And so once the federal government starts to be more streamlined in its mine permitting, then I think things are really going to take off in the United States, because they've definitely got a willing administration that wants to electrify. And I think now realizes that, well, we really need metal to do that. And it would sure be better if it was domestic metal from the United States, or at least North America, where we have the highest environmental standards, we have the highest workforce standards. So it's coming around, and yeah, we sure hope to access some of that money. Honestly, as a United States taxpayer, I'm not so crazy about our government handing out money, but Alaska Energy Metals will definitely take it if we're awarded a grant.
Great. One other question: how much focus, or what are the plans for the higher grade Canwell target in 2024?
Yeah, it would be spectacular to intersect a big, massive sulfide deposit that's really rich. It would be an absolute game changer. I mean, even 5 million tons of that sort of material that I showed at Canwell that's outcropping would make a spectacularly rich ore body. But even if there's pods of mineralization like that can be mined near surface, I mean, that can change the economics tremendously because it can result in rapid payback of the capital cost of a mill. So we're definitely on the hunt for high grade. The parallels of the geology here are very much like Norilsk. There's definitely still great exploration potential to find that rich mass of sulfide, and we're thinking next year will be a 4 drill rig program with 3 punching holes into the bulk tonnage Eureka zone, but having a roving drill that will test those high grade targets that we've developed.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. I guess just to review, what news would we expect to have over the coming weeks and months from Alaska Energy?
Yep. So we've got a deal closing on the purchase of a company in Quebec and another project to announce there that is essentially self-funding because the company comes with money. We've got assay results for 4 holes yet to be released in the coming 2.5, 3 weeks. We potentially have a resource calculation based on historical drill holes that we recently purchased. And then we're into the next year crunching numbers on all our summer drilling to upgrade that resource before March of next year. So no shortage of news flow coming, Tim.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank Greg Beischer for presenting today, and thanks everyone on the line for tuning in. A reminder, the replay for this webinar will be available on our website as well as on YouTube, as well as our fall mining showcase we held last week, where Alaska Energy Metals presented, as well as over 80 other companies across the spectrum of different commodities. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, that was a great conference last week by the Tim. Congratulations to the RedCloud team for putting together such a great event.
Thank you very much, Greg.